We are so excited to bring you now the next lecture, which is how to promote your career using social media. So you've heard a whole bunch of talks about how to just launch your career and put it on super turbo. So check this out.
So hi everyone, I'm Mike Gisondi from Stanford. It's nice to see you all. I'm really honored to be speaking at the forum this year, so thanks for the invitation. And speaking about a topic I really like, which is social media. So let's just do a show of hands. How many people hate social media? Just let's get it out there. Okay, so a few of you. Great, a lot of you. All right. I was not a believer either, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey with social media, and then I'm going to give you lots of tips and tricks that hopefully will take away some of the pain when you're using professional social media accounts. So I could have gone in a lot of directions for this lecture. I chose to do 4 things. We're going to talk about how to build your platform, how to disseminate your research. We'll have just a couple slides on how to teach, and then a slide or 2 on how to be a public health advocate. But the majority of the talk is going to be about platform and research. I do have a disclosure. I'm on the editorial board of International Clinician Educators blog. And in 2014, I was just like you. I was sitting in SAEM Dallas at a panel that was called From Twitter to Tenure. And I attended it because I wanted tenure. And I thought, well, I should get Twitter. And I had no social media account at the time. I actually have never had a Facebook account. I'm still very proud of that. Never had a Facebook account. I had none. And I showed up really being a disbeliever as well, thinking I wasn't going to enjoy it. But Michelle Lin from Academic Life and Emergency Medicine was on the panel, and she talked about the ability to disseminate your work and the reach that you could have to a medical community that's far beyond publishing in a journal article. And it was very compelling. So we met the next day and we created the Emergency Medicine Match Advice podcast series and launched it 8 years ago. And from there, I really have seen my career change dramatically. I now teach an undergrad class at Stanford called Does Social Media Make Better Physicians? It's about knowledge translation in the digital age for medicine. And something I couldn't have imagined I would be doing 8 years ago. I put on an international conference last year called Infodemic. It was on social media and COVID-19 misinformation. I'm the guest editor for a special theme issue of the Journal of Medical Internet Research. I have this wonderful social network of people that I've met primarily on Twitter all around the world with invitations to speak at conferences just because I made relationships online. So these are just a few of the highlights from my CV. My CV is demonstrably different because I leaned into social media. So, take that for what it is. It's a journey. If you're, a Twitter hater today and you decide to, dip your toe in the water, it takes a while. It takes a lot of commitment. It takes some tips and tricks we're going to learn about in this lecture. It takes daily work, but it really can pay dividends. So let's talk about platform. So what does this guy mean about platform? Imagine a researcher who is the expert in a tiny little telomere on this one chromosome. And she wants to get promoted in the professoriate to full professor. So that means she has to have national reputation, right? So she goes to conferences where they talk about that one little telomere on that one chromosome, and she publishes in the journal of the one little telomere and the one little chromosome, and that's just her tiny research network. There's not that many people that study this one thing. And she goes and she seeks out these people in conferences and things. And this is the traditional way that folks would get promoted in the professoriate. They would get national reputation within their field. But that's not really a big impact, right? If the whole point is to just get a popularity contest amongst your friends who study the one little telomere on the one chromosome, is that really knowledge translation? Are you really reaching as big a public as you can? And I would argue that you need to develop a platform. So platform is a fancy word for reach. If you imagine a book publisher will take an author who has a large platform, who has lots of people that could buy their book. And that could be determined by where you work, what organizations you're affiliated with, your social media followers, and just as a conglomerate, those can be tens or 20,000 people, and then there's a reason to publish your book. So it's about reach, it's about disseminating your knowledge. And there's a couple, I'll give you my slides at the end, there's a couple books that I would recommend if you're interested. The first is Platform Getting Noticed in a Busy World. And Michael Hyatt talks about success in business as a compelling product and a meaningful platform. And if you watch CNBC, you know that this is true, right? So Shark Tank is the compelling platform, and the interesting products are brought to them every day. And what they do is provide platform. They help these entrepreneurs get their goods to market, right? So that is platform. I think in academic medicine, there's a similar formula to be had, and that's compelling scholarship and dissemination of expertise. And that dissemination of expertise is leveraging your developing platform. So gone are the days for academic promotion of just publish or perish in terms of journal articles. It really is now visible or vanish. And I'm going to talk about how to make yourself visible online in a number of ways as we go through this. But a couple of other recommendations for resources. These are 3 great books by Dory Clark. She's a conference speaker and an adjunct professor at Duke's Business School. She was in politics earlier in her career, and she made a career pivot. She reinvented herself. So she wrote a book called Reinventing You, and it talks about career pivots, and it's actually quite good. And then once she moved into this new world of conference speaking, she wanted to be the best out there, so she wrote a book called Stand Out. And once she was standing out, once she was a big fish in a big pond, she leveraged that expertise and monetized it in this last book. And all of these things describe platform. As she develops it, as she monetizes it, it really is a great example across all 3 books. This is my favorite place I learned about platform, and it's the best conference that I've ever attended. Hands down, the best conference I've ever gone to. So it's the Writing for Medical Professionals conference at Harvard. It brings about 400 would-be doctor authors together and about the same number of editors and publishers and agents, and they all interact, and you pitch your book, and you learn a lot. It was a wonderful conference, and at that conference, there was a number of talks about platform, and this is just one of them by Rusty Shelton, who wrote this book, Mastering the New Media Landscape. But I really like what's in the cover for this book. The giant boulders you once had to move to get coverage, CNN, Oprah, have been smashed by the internet and supplanted by scores of pebbles, websites, social media, blogs, podcasts, newsletters, things we call micromedia. And that builds platform, the more of those things that you can put out there. So how do you build your platform? I'm going to give you 3 tips. The first is to use a consistent professional brand. The second is to use the correct social media platform for what the job is. And then you need to produce some relevant content. And I'll take you through each of those. Now, your consistent brand is very important, and you all have a developing brand, and you need to own your brand. If you don't do brand management for yourself, other people will have their image of you that perhaps is not authentic to what you want your image to be, right? So particularly in a professional social media account. So I love this quote from Bezos: your brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room. So, what are they going to say about you? Brands are very powerful. I will never buy the coffee from that machine, even though it might be the same coffee that I would pay $2 more at Starbucks for, because I have brand loyalty to Starbucks. It's consistent. I know what I'm going to get every time. So when you're creating your consistency in your professional brand, there's a couple of tips. One, you should use the same picture on every platform that you have your face. And it should be, it should always be the same picture, because it confuses users who don't know you if they see different pictures of you on different sites, and it lessens the ability to recognize you, essentially. And then you need a tag phrase. You need to be able to have an elevator pitch for your work as you're developing your work as junior faculty. So here's mine. My research improves patient care by developing the most effective ways to train physicians. And you'll see that on lots of different websites for me. So everywhere that my face is, it's always the black shirt photo. That's what I call this photo. The black shirt photo appears everywhere. And you'll see that even on my website, I have my tagline over and over again. So you need to stay on brand. For me, staying on brand is 3 things. So I post about medical education. I'm a medical education researcher. I post about emergency medicine. I'm an emergency physician. And I post about the Stanford Cardinal because it's the greatest mascot in the nation. I have broken my rules, so it's important to stay on brand. You're not posting vacation photos of your family on a professional social media account, right? You really want to develop a brand by having rich content in just a couple narrow areas. But I broke my my rule in 2020, and that's because of the COVID-19 and presidential election mis and disinformation. And I was enraged throughout 2020, and I was rage tweeting as a result. And I broke all of my rules. But I decided that it was okay. This is my rationalization. I decided it was okay because I had platform, right? So I was a physician at an academic medical center with lots of followers, and I just couldn't let misinformation go unchecked. So I felt like I needed to tweet about it. I needed to correct it, identify it, and correct it, which I did a lot of. So if you look back at my account, it was rage tweeting for many, many months. This is one digital brand pitfall: never post about a patient. Even if you think you can de-identify an image, it can still get back to the patient. So never ever post about a patient, never ever post about a patient. All right, so tip 2 is to select the correct social media platform. And there's lots of them out there, and I kind of look at them as a toolbox. And these are just tools in the toolbox, right? You're gonna pick the right social media platform for the right problem. So you never nail a nail with a screwdriver, right? You wanna use a hammer. So which social media accounts might you develop? One, you could do LinkedIn. It's very professional. It interacts with other professionals. You might get a job offer that's interesting. You might go to Instagram and be an influencer. And, you know, physician influencers, you might, shrug your shoulders at them, but they have millions of followers. They really do influence a large number of Americans, and they definitely have platform and reach. So it is a viable option. And then you go to TikTok and make little educational videos for teenagers, which can be very important as well. And then there's Twitter. And I think, if you're gonna create a medical, professional account for medicine, it's probably Twitter that you have to join, whether you like Twitter or you don't like Twitter. Some people really hate it, and now we have Elon to contend with as well, to hate him. But this is where the medical professionals are. It's #MedTwitter. It's 30 to 60-year-olds as a profile. And that's where the conversation and frankly where your platform will be built. So if you've never used Twitter, here's some tips on getting started with Twitter. Download it to your phone. That was easy. Upload a professional headshot, write a very brief description of yourself. Search for a blog post called "Mom, This Is How Twitter Works," because Twitter's very complicated. And this is the blog post, and it explains everything about Twitter that you ever want to know. You want to compose your first tweet. You want to follow 10 medical professionals and watch what they do online. I teach this in my class. It's called lurking. So I make all of my freshmen lurk, and I make them follow medical professionals and see what the discourse is that they have. What do they use their platform for? And then most importantly, post clinical pearls and your thoughts on research publications. This is where you're curating content and developing your expertise, demonstrating your platform. So how do you do that? So you can go to PubMed, and you can click on the little Twitter emblem there, and it'll give you a tweet that looks like this, and that's fine. It would be much more rich if you added to that tweet a sentence or two about why you liked an article that you're sharing, or what you found interesting, or why someone else should read that article, a bit of color commentary with your curation. A better thing to do, though, is to avoid the little Twitter icon on PubMed and instead go to the journal that published the article and use their share function, because it increases the Altmetrics for the article. So article level metrics will go up from a journal website, but not from PubMed. We're going to talk about what those are in a minute. So if you do click from a journal, it's going to be an ugly tweet, so make it look a little nicer before you send it out. And then my last tip is to contribute content. And this is a great quote from Graham McMahon, who's the president of the Accreditation Council for Continuing Medical Education. Now that information is ubiquitous, simple information exchange has low value. In its place is shared wisdom, the opportunity to engage in problem solving and practice relevant ways. This is what the definition of knowledge translation is, and this is what my class is all about. Knowledge translation, is the dissemination of knowledge to improve health. And this is certainly the strength to these words on social media when you're acting as a curator of content. So how do you contribute content? 3 golden rules for this. First, to curate content. So I don't know if anyone knows Jeff Riddell at LA County USC. Anybody from LA County? No. So Jeff Riddell's a medical education researcher. He runs their fellowship there. And whatever Jeff Riddell tweets about, whatever journal articles that he tweets, I always stop and read the article, and it's always outstanding. So for whatever reason, he can curate content for other medical education researchers in a really smart way. There's something pedagogical about that. There's something scholarly about being able to do that, and it demonstrates what his expertise, what he thinks is important, that I think is important. So this is curation. You want to post every single day. Now, you don't want to sit on Twitter all day or sit on a social media account all day. You want to get on there 5 minutes, read a couple tweets, put one of your own, put it away. Don't make it a distraction in your life. But post every day. That's a very important way to build your platform to get lots of users to see you. And then the 1 to 5 rule is, I think, a very important one. You should put something out there for every 5 things you take away from Twitter. And if I sit for 5 minutes and go through Twitter, I'll find 5 interesting things in a pretty short amount of time. So I want you to not be lurkers over time. I want you to be one of the 1%, the heavy contributors. The heavy contributors are the ones that have brand identity, that have professional brand identity. And that's certainly the goal. All right, so that's platform, and it relates somewhat to research. So let's talk about how to disseminate your research. So we're gonna say out with the old. So this is my research team, and we're a merry band of characters. We've done a lot of papers together, a lot of projects together. We did one that was a particularly long and arduous qual study that we were really proud of, and we took to the Association of Medical Educators in Europe, AME, which is the biggest med ed conference in the world. It's great. And we wrote a paper and published it in their journal, Medical Teacher, that had 4 citations when I last checked, and a whopping impact factor of 2.6. So we spent 2 years writing a paper that no one has ever read in a journal that's probably not that important. So it's really deflating, right? So in with the new. So as I said, in 2014, I met with Michelle Lin the day after her panel, and I pitched essentially the Emergency Medicine Match Advice series. It started out as a YouTube series. It's now been converted all to podcasts. And in the first week that we grabbed analytics in 2014, there was total podcast listens over 2,000 in 600 cities in 45 countries. Certainly reach, right? If I was to write a journal article about that same topic that I gave a podcast episode about, I would have to send it for peer review, which is a good thing, but takes a lot of time. It would get published in a journal, hopefully 9 months later, 12 months later, and then a medical student would have to find their way to that journal, which is incredibly unlikely, right? So using social media to disseminate the same work has a lot of power. We pulled numbers last year for this talk, and we had 110,000 podcast listens for what was 35 episodes at the time over the course of 8 years. If you think about medical students going to EM, there's about 2,500 that go in every year. So this is a really great number over the course of 8 years. I think most medical students have listened to this. So how do you disseminate your research? I've got 3 tips for this as well. Leverage Altmetrics, blog about every publication you write, and amplify others. So Altmetrics. Altmetric is article level metrics. This is a proprietary company that creates a metric score for an article, right? So you have journal impact factors, so it's how good a journal is, and it's based on the number of times articles in that journal were cited within the last couple of years. So the New England Journal has a very high impact factor because people cite New England Journal articles all the time, right? So that's, so you want to publish in a high impact journal, that's desirable. But what if you write a really great article in a not so great journal that gets a lot of attention? So without Altmetric, that article would never get a measure of success, and Altmetric gives that article that measure. And you can get these fancy reports for the publications that you have that can go in your promotions file. It'll show you where your article ranked within the same number of articles over a certain period of time. It's kind of snazzy. It's a nice report. And then if you go from journal to paper to individual author, the individual author measure that matters is your H-index. Folks heard about your H-index? So your H-index essentially is the number of citations mapped against the number of journal articles ranked by the number of citations. So it's easy to say, if you've had 6 publications that were each cited 6 times, your H-index is 6. If you've had 10 publications that were each cited 10 times, then your H-index is 10. So that's how you calculate it. So a good H-index is 20 and 20 years of practice. If you have an H-index of 60, you're going to like the National Academy of Medicine. So just to kind of put it in perspective, and they judge it at about 20 years. And then the M value looks at junior faculty in terms of their H factor, or H-index rather. So you can game the H-index. You can just blog and tweet about that next paper, right? If you have an H-index of 6 and the 7th paper just needs a couple more citations, you blog about it, you put it out into the ether, and people will find it. If you let it languish in a journal, no one's ever going to find it, right? So you want to put it out there. So how do you know what your H-index is? You can go to Google Scholar and log in, and then click My Profile, and your H-index is right there. You could also go to Scopus and do the same thing. All right, so tip number 2 is to blog about every publication. And I think this is really important to give a refresh to your CV. So I wrote this paper in 2008. I was really proud of it. It was a nice paper. No one's read it in probably the last decade, right? It had a little press at the time. So I decided recently that I would write a blog post about it. And in that blog post, I would put a link to the direct journal, not to PubMed, so that the alt metric for the article would go up. And then I tweeted about the blog post about the paper. And if you look at the measures for that paper, 0 people looked at it for a while, and then it spiked for a week, and then it went back kind of down to 0. So you can do this with any part of your CV. You can blog about all your publications, about digital scholarship that you've written in the past. You can bring it back to life, and you can drive those measures up, right? This is disseminating your research. So if you've never written a blog before, it's just like writing a newspaper article. You never bury the lead. So the most important thing in a blog is always first, and then background information. It's the reverse of a journal article, which, it's intro and methods and results. You kind of wind up getting the meat of it at the very end. So you don't do that with a blog. And if you want, I think this is a really great blog post about disseminating research. It has lots more than I can say in a 45-minute talk. It's from the St. Elman's blog in the UK. It's really great, and it'll be in the slide deck at the end. And then tip 3 is to amplify others. So find your friends online and promote their work, and they'll do the same for you. And that, that's just good karma juju, and it'll increase your platform in that manner. All right, so a couple of slides about teaching and being a public health advocate. So you need to know who your audience is that you're going to teach, and you have to figure out which social media platform they're likely to use, and then go to that platform if that's what you want to teach, those are the folks you want to teach. So where are your learners? I ask this of my incoming freshmen every year. So if you are 30 to 60 in medicine, you're on Twitter. If you are 20 to 65 and you post vacation photos, you're on Instagram. And if you're a teenager, you're on TikTok. And when I ask my 17-year-olds every year, I call them my cute little freshmen. When my cute little freshmen come in, I ask what platform they use. They've never used Facebook, they've never used Twitter, and many of them don't use Instagram at all. They use only TikTok, which is really surprising to me that freshmen and incoming freshmen at Stanford, that's all they use. So you have to go there if you want to teach them. So here's just a couple of examples of how each of those platforms can be used to teach. So this is Twitter. So Eric Warm is a program director in internal medicine and a muckety-muck in med ed. And he was at the ACGME conference watching another muckety-muck in med ed, Mark Triola, give a talk. And I couldn't go to the ACGME conference that year because I was going to the chair conference. And I was literally flying over Florida, which is where this conference was, when he took a screenshot and tweeted about this piece of information from a presentation. If Mark Triola was to publish the same slide deck, or the same content rather from his slide deck in a journal article, again, it would take 9 to 12 months to get out there, and then I would have to find it. Instead, Eric took a snapshot and it was in my hand, right? There's something about the knowledge translation there, the curation there, the pedagogy that comes from that, the ability to disseminate research. So Twitter has power. If you want to take it away from academic medicine and look at COVID, right, Twitter was the reason that doctors knew what chest x-rays looked like during COVID. Twitter was the reason that we knew to put patients in a prone position, because folks tried it in New York City and they tweeted about it. So that's how all of the information went out. It wasn't journal articles in that first month. All right, if you've never been on the Allium site for account for Instagram, I highly recommend it. So they use Instagram to teach, and they do so in really interesting dynamic ways. They have moving images and multiple image slide decks that kind of take you through a topic. It's really outstanding. And if you thought Instagram couldn't be used to teach, check this out, and I think you'll change your mind. And then, TikTok is important to younger audiences. And if you're going to be teaching teen or pediatric patients, this is where you want to go. So, this is a really important distinction between skinfluencers and dermatologists. A skinfluencer, they're all over TikTok. And this one is Skincare by Hiram. Hiram has 6 million followers. And Hiram regularly tells you how not to get zits in ways that really damage your skin. So Dr. Joyce debunks him all the time by telling you how to actually take care of your skin, right? So she's, bringing credibility, getting rid of misinformation, bringing credible information at TikTok. This is a really important role for physicians, and one that you certainly can consider as you're embarking on your social media career. And then lastly, to be a public health advocate. So you've created your platform. You've done all the things that I suggested you do. It's a couple years from now. You've got a huge reach. You've got a huge audience. Use that for good, right? So with power comes great responsibility. So Megan Rainey at Brown tweets about COVID. Uni Blackstock tweets about health equity. Gita Pensa tweets about physician suicide. They have their brand, they stay in their lane, and they become experts in our eyes because of that. So do the same thing when you develop your platform. I have some articles here to read. If you want to get my slides, you can take a screenshot of that QR code, or you can go to bit.ly, and it's SAM_social media. And that's it. I'll take questions if you'd like. Yeah.
Can you talk about like tone changes between if your audience is, let's say, like teenagers who want to be like that person who's debunking this influencer versus like, on Twitter then having a different tone, and whether you need to be concerned about like the professionality of trying to talk to maybe younger folks?
Yeah, I think at first glance, a lot of these physician influencers on TikTok look silly, right? I mean, they look silly. But they're appealing, as you say, to a specific audience that is used to high dopamine constantly on their device. They want things moving and fast and almost silly, and they get the point across. And, my daughter uses TikTok. I've asked her, many times, look at this doctor and what do you think? And she's like, that was really cool. I learned something. And the doctor looked kind of crazy to me. So, find a couple examples of those, and I'm not going to say emulate them, but take away the architecture of those TikToks, right? Like why did they go so fast? Why did they use font that appears on the screen and disappears on the screen in almost like an erratic way? Those things are very appealing. Other questions? Yeah.
There's a pretty, I think, big movement in the point-of-care ultrasound social media world where they will post cases and, like, ideally no patient information, but that seems to be pretty ubiquitous in the POCUS world. That they're posting, that residencies are posting cases. You said don't post patient information. Those two things seem not to be driving.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in not posting about patients. I get what they're doing, but I think there's probably other ways to teach the same material. There's de-identifying protocols that you can follow. So you can change the gender of the patient. You can wait 6 months. I think it's a minimum of 6 months. You can change the age, and there's ways to de-identify that make it unlikely that a patient's going to find it. But I remember one of my residents at Northwestern when I was still PD took a picture of a blue patient who had met hemoglobinemia. I'm like, that's the only blue patient Northwestern will see this year. Like, what are you doing? Like, obviously, just because you didn't put his face doesn't mean that he can't figure it out. So I think the timing probably is the most important part of that de-identifying framework. So maybe they do that. I don't know. And then ultrasound images to me all look the same. Like, I don't really know how to use an ultrasound, so I couldn't figure out who a patient is from just a simple case. Other comments, thoughts? Yeah.
So how do you avoid the potential for a comment or a post evolving into a back and forth with somebody who's like a naysayer from your perspective? How do you not get engaged in that, or how do you sideswipe that, especially in the world of COVID between this treatment versus this thing?
Yeah, so there's naysayers and there's trolls. And there's bullies, online bullies. There was a really great article in JAM Internal Medicine about that last year. I think most of the time these people are engaging you with mis or disinformation, right? So there's ways online, there's frameworks to debunk misinformation online. So you basically state the misinformation, you identify that it's misinformation, you state a correct fact, you put a resource or reference, you explain why the fact is correct, and then you state the fact again, you state it twice. So this is how you're supposed to respond. And then if they continue, just don't respond. I think that's fine. Trolls and things are different. And I think for the COVID vaccine, which is a great example of this in our time, right? There's a spectrum of vaccine acceptance, right? There's people who take all the vaccines. There's people who refuse some, but they don't really know why they're refusing it. And then there's truly anti-vax. And anti-vax patients have very fixed beliefs. they're antisocial, they're very individualistic, they're anti-science. Like, you can't change their mind. You know, it's truly a fixed belief. They're not the hesitant group in the middle. Yeah.
How do you allocate your time to do some of these things? Do you actually carve out a specific Twitter time, or do you try to do it in real time throughout the day? How do you kind of?
I usually do it at the grocery store when I'm in line, honestly. Like, I do it in silly times when, you know, when I'm waiting for something to happen. I'll look at my Twitter. You know, I think the other digital scholarship I produce takes more time. So I write, you know, a monthly series for that blog that I'm an editor for. You know, I probably spend 10 or more hours on a blog post, I would say. You know, I'm pretty meticulous about putting them out there, so I do that every month. But that adds to my CV. I have a section of my CV that's digital scholarship, and why maybe it's not peer-reviewed. In total, I mean, I have like 100 posts on all these different medical education topics. Like, there's something compelling about that for a promotions and tenure committee. So I find that time to be worthwhile. And then I'm a big believer in like triple dipping. So I might use social media, and then I teach a class about social media, and then I'm here lecturing about social media, and I write about social media. Like, I try to stay in that lane as well. So, you know, it's not always a waste of time. But I really believe, like, don't stay on Twitter very long. Like spend 5 minutes. Twitter's like a very scary place to go. It's very, very dark. You can go down the dark roads. So really just use it for what, you know, I talked about, which is professionalizing an account and putting your expertise out there.
So I listened to this talk last year, which I loved, which is why we invited you back. But, so I tried to implement some of the.
Oh, yeah, what'd you do?
Last week. Well, I tried to tweet papers.
Okay.
For a while, like, I think for the first 6 weeks after your talk, I was really good at it.
Oh, good.
I fell off the bandwagon.
Yeah.
But my thing was, I felt like I had to be on my computer, not on my phone, because I wasn't able to do everything on my phone. So, like, you have to find the link, and then if it's from the journal, it's very, very long. So then I would go to Bitly, then I would shorten it on Bitly, then I would copy it, then I would bring it back to Twitter. But this is like a 30-minute commitment for me.
Yeah.
So do you just get faster, or?
Well, so you can Bitly, I'm getting lots of spam these days. You can Bitly the big long URLs so that you can have extra characters for your message. And, you know, otherwise you can just shorten your message a little bit and, you know, and not worry about the Bitly part. I tweeted, just to be meta, right? I tweeted my slide deck with hashtag SAEM 2022 while I was sitting over there getting ready for my talk, which, you know, I just wanted to be meta. But, you know, I mean, it required a little bit of maneuvering from Slideshare, the website Slideshare, to the tweet. But, you know, you need a teenager to teach you how to do it. There's ways to do it. Yeah.
I think you mentioned a little bit about the promotional committees. I was wondering, what are those talks like, especially in a place where they don't have a very clear set of guidelines for criteria and metrics for this area of social media, blogs versus podcasts versus Twitter posting and the reach that you get, and how do you negotiate a proper compensation for the time that you invest in?
Is this about promotion? I missed the very first thing you said.
Yeah.
About promotion. Okay, yeah. So the world is changing a little bit. I think that the P&T committees at a lot of schools will look at reputation in a kind of fuzzy way. And, you know, I think that you can build reputation through, you know, all the things I just talked about that affects your letter writers, right? So you need so many external referees, and those are the folks that will know you from Twitter, right? Like, I built this social network of people around the world who I'd never met in person, who I've written a paper with one of them, never met them. So, you know, these folks can be your external referees, and I think that can be very helpful. I do think, you know, there's things that you can add to your long form, your dossier when you go up. And, you know, those can be nice infographics of the number of, you know, times the what do I want to say, the website metrics for whatever blog post that you put out or podcast listens or whatnot. And I have one of those for my promotions and tenure pack because I feel like it's important. I have 100 digital scholarship publications on my CV, and, you know, digital scholarship's not part of Stanford's P&T committee standard CV, but I don't really care, and I just put them there. Because I feel like, you know, there's a couple pages of it, somebody's going to pay attention to that. There are, times changing at some of the bigger schools. Mayo Clinic now has a social media expectation in every line at every rank. And this makes sense, right? So Mayo is a referral hospital, so you want all of your doctors on social media, right? Like you want them to be foundable. So that's part of the promotion process there. It incentivizes people to have accounts and do those sorts of things. And I think when the Mayos of the world start to do it, I think there's other shops that will follow suit. Mm-hmm.
I think I'm most intrigued by what you were discussing as far as research, increasing research citations by promoting brand, and in the theme a little bit of self-promotion.
Oh, it's a lot of self-promotion.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, do you find that those increased citations are literally from someone seeing it, reading the post, and then saying, hey, I should cite this paper? Or do you think that it somehow influences the search algorithms by being out in the ether and just having tweeted about it, the algorithms kind of pick it up and are more likely to show it in results? Do you have any sense of that? How it's gaining these extra citations?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess you're right. If you post enough times, you'll end up on the front page of Google instead of the second page of Google, which is really your goal, right? For whatever piece of information you have is. I created my own blog as a laboratory to manipulate my H-index because I wanted to see if I could. Like, I paid $3,000 to make a website because I wanted to see if I could manipulate it. So my blogs on my website are exclusively about my old articles, and they all have that little link that takes you to the journal article and drives the Altmetric and all those things. My H-index just went up to 18. I was paying attention to the 18th paper, and I was tweeting about it a lot. Now, did that 18th paper get cited somewhere that 18th time because someone saw it on social media, or did they just find it by happenstance? Like, I don't know the answer to that. But for the effort that I've put in, which is not a ton of effort, but it's certainly some effort, I have manipulated these numbers a little bit. I find it fascinating. So Altmetric as well, I published an editorial over the summer last year, and I just tweeted the hell out of it. And it rose to like the second highest Altmetric for that journal for the year. And it probably came off the back of like 10 tweets. So these things can be manipulated. That's why, similar to the other social media metrics, some of these, these metrics aren't beloved at P&T committees either. So like Stanford doesn't use the H-index. You can't include that. They specifically tell you not to include it in your long form. But a lot of schools do. A lot of schools look at it. So to the degree that you can manipulate it through some of this technique, I think it's worth doing. At the beginning, though, you said say self-promotion, like blatant self-promotion on Twitter is generally frowned upon, right? If that's the only thing you tweet about is your own work, like that's kind of lame, right? So, I think you can do that. You certainly, I tweet about my own work, but tweet about everybody else's work and retweet, your friend's work, and I think those things really matter. And, I love how diligent you were tweeting like an article a day or whatever you did. I'm not that intense. If I find an article I enjoy during the week, then I tweet it. Like that, it's not, that's my consistency level for it. And I generally read journal articles online, so it's easy to just click the button.
So you said for the H-index, like your 18th paper is the one you promoted. Do you have to promote your latest paper, or can you promote like your 7th paper?
You can promote whatever paper you want. My latest paper will be 0 citations, right? So if I want to go from 17 to 18, it's that 18th paper in the rank. And if you go to Google Scholar, when you log on that page that shows the H-index, it shows all of your publications in rank order by the number of citations that they have.
The ones that have the lowest.
You should use the ones that are the next lowest under your H-index. So if your H-index is 10, then you want to use the 11th paper on the list, because you want to convert that one to an 11th citation so that your H-index goes to 11. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's totally a game. It's a really, really nerdy game, by the way. Like, I fully understand what I'm telling you to do, but it's platform. Like, that's what this is.
This is done. That's what I'm going to do.
Okay, good. You're going to go figure out what is your H-index. You know, I went down a deep rabbit hole one day and I looked up the H index of all the chairs at Stanford. It was really humbling. And that was a bad nerd day. Like, that was an hour. I had wine in my hand. It was a bad moment. But
So you mentioned Stanford doesn't use H-index?
does not, yeah.
Use Altmetrics, or what do they use instead?
They use nothing. And I'm on the P&T committee from assistant to associate, and people perseverate over the quality of the journal that you publish in. They don't necessarily record impact factor, but they'll talk about, you know, one paper in science is worth 50 papers in a meta journal, right? So, you know, that's said all the time in P&T committees. So, I think that's the archaic metric, and it's the one they still go on. Now, that being said, just because they don't use these things doesn't mean you can't give them the information, right? Like, oops, here's all my digital scholarship, right? Like, oops, here's my Altmetrics. And they can choose to use it or not use it, but I mean, I probably biases. This is again, my laboratory. I'm going up for promotion to professor this summer, so maybe in the fall, then all of this is proven right. We'll see.
Wait, so you are saying that even though Stanford CV doesn't have a slot for digital scholarship, you kind of...
I just put it on there, yeah. I have lots of parts of my CV that really don't belong, but, yeah.
When they say, oh, that'll be stricken from the record, you know,
Yeah, right.
everyone's heard it.
Yeah, exactly. All right, I think I've used up all my time here. Thank you guys very much for your attention.